do that. Cool. All right, we're off to the races. We'll get it going here. Elliot Smith, welcome to Pave The Way Podcast, man. I'm a big fan of your show, The Real Dealz. I've been listening for a while now, and I pretty much listen to every episode. So I really appreciate the great content you put out for the real estate community, and I'm happy we're able to connect.
Thanks, man. Did you listen to it before with Tucker?
A little bit. Honestly, I just started listening when you took over, just because it started popping up more on my feeds. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Funny. Yeah. It's hopefully I was going to say, people that went from Tucker to me, hopefully I didn't ruin it for them.
No, man, you do a great job. It's awesome. You interview some people that I'm like friends with. So I'm like, oh man, I got to connect with this Elliot guy. I feel like we know a lot of the same people. So I'm happy you were able to do that. So let's get into it, man. So tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and how you kind of got started in the real estate business, because you're doing some big things out in Washington.
Yeah. So I'm born and raised in Southeast Washington, Tri-Cities. It's a smaller market, like 300,000, 330 people. And my dad is a physician, but he would do flipping on and off. Like he's flipped a 500 unit apartment complex. He owned some land, sold some land off, did some fix and flip deals. And he never told me to go to college. He said, Elliot, your skills are going to be with people. And so I really wouldn't waste your time with college, going into it. And so when I was 18, he had bought a house, and he would take me on some of his appointments with him. And like, even when I was a kid, and tell me like why we were buying the house or how we were getting that house, because he was helping people. And so one of the houses he got when I was 18, the dad had the daughter renting this house from him, and he just, the daughter wasn't paying rent, and the dad was just fed up and just sold it from underneath her. And so the daughter was all pissed. And my dad went in there, paid her money to get out, held her hand while she was crying and upset, and helped her. And he got the house for $50,000. He had me and a buddy who was an older friend. He was my shop teacher, fix the house up. Well, my shop teacher buddy ended up being out of town for like a month and a half when we were fixing it. And so I had to do it. And so I feel really sorry for the people that actually ended up buying that house. But what I noticed in that was we didn't make that much money, but he made like 40 grand just writing checks. And I'm like, okay. Well, fast forward, I didn't really think about it too much. After that, I was trying to work. I got in the electrical union. I screwed that up. I was having some issues with drugs and substance abuse. I was in rehab at 21. And so after rehab, I ended up moving with my aunt and uncle over in Vancouver, Washington, which is just north of Portland. It's a suburb of Portland, but in Washington. Okay. And so lived with them for a while, didn't take it too serious. And then I had a relapse, and then I got really serious. My uncle's like, you have 2 weeks to get a job or get out of my house. And so I had met a guy at a referee camp that worked for Fran's Bakery as a bread delivery company that, they stock grocery stores, they bring restaurants, institutions, things like that. And so he said he was making like 80 grand a year delivering bread. And I'm like, I have no idea what this is. And so I got a part-time job there and a part-time job at Lowe's. And I was like, whoever goes full-time first, I'm going to go with. And Fran's went full-time first. And so at that point, I went all into Fran's. I ended up getting a route in like 6 months. I was making 60 grand a year, 65 grand a year. I was moving all over for him. Had my now wife, but we were long distance girlfriend for a while. And then when we got married about 4 years later, we moved. We were in Tri-Cities again, and we moved back to Vancouver because it was a better opportunity for me to promote. And she had bought her first house at 20, and we were like, do we sell it? Do we keep it as a rental? What do we do? And my dad's like, keep it as a rental. It's a great rental. And so sure enough, we turned it into a rental. We went and bought a house in Vancouver. And then a year later, we're like, let's buy another house. So exactly a year later, actually probably a little shorter than a year, we bought another house and then turned our second house into a rental. And then when we were living in that other house, we're like, there's got to be a better, faster way.
Yeah. And so
we said how to buy rentals faster, and Bigger Pockets showed up. And so we went down this rabbit trail of trying to buy duplexes from this. We had found these shitty send people letters, that we got off the Bigger Pockets site. And I remember the first time Christy and I were hand addressing those envelopes. And I remember the first time we got a call, we were so excited. So like a month in, I had met a couple of guys on Bigger Pockets, but we got a call from this lady. I was like 5 o'clock at night. I was already asleep because when I was running routes even as a supervisor, if I had to run a route, I was getting up at like 1 in the morning. And so I get a call at like 5:30. This lady's like, hey, I have a duplex I want to sell for 120,000. And I'm like, okay, I'll call you back later. But then I kind of came to, and I'm like, shit, that's a good deal. So I called this guy that I met on Bigger Pockets. He's like, try to tie it up for 115. So I did. I tied it up for 115. And he wanted to do all this like different kind of like stuff that I didn't understand. I would understand now. I don't even remember, but how he was trying to finance it. I'm like, this just doesn't make sense to me because we're going to split it. And he's like, well, what if I just paid you $5,000 and I just took the deal? And I'm like, that sounds fantastic. So he gave me $5,000. He bought it, never went inside, sold it for like 165, made like 40. So I'm like, shit. But I was still happy. I made $5,000. Then we did another one the next month, made like $8,800. And then that whole first year, Chrissy quit her job about 6 months in. And then I took a year because she wanted to be very safe and secure. So we saved up like over $100,000, didn't spend any of our money from real estate, just put it back into the marketing stuff and had no debt other than our houses. And then I ended up quitting my job a year later. And then 2 months after I quit my job, we made $100,000 in 1 month just spinning properties. So, and I was making like at the time, like $90,000 a year, working 70 hours a week. We're like, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Kind of how we jumped into it. And then I had a mentor from one of my buddies I worked with. He owned like 100 rentals free and clear in Portland. And I had met him about a couple months in with my buddy introduced us. And the first thing he said to me was, don't ask me for money. I'll never give you money. Well, 8 months in, after a while, I just kept calling him. You find these guys that just love the game. And I would just call him and tell him about the deals I'm doing. And like, I'm spinning this one. And here's how I negotiated this one. And he started answering my phone calls more and more. And about 8 months in, he's like, hey, you're giving too many good deals away. Here's $300,000. Go buy a house and I'll pay for everything. And we'll split it 75-25. I'll get myself. I got 75%. He got 25%.
Dude, that's incredible, man. And dude, you seem like a pretty young guy. What are you, like 30 and you're young?
32. Yeah. 32. So yeah,
you're still young. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. That's a problem. I'll hang out with buddies that are older, that, I'll have guys that are in their 50s and they own like 9,000 units and all that stuff. And I'm like, shit, I got to be there. And then the more and more I've been thinking about it the last 6 months, is like, what did they have at 32? You know what I mean? I got a lot of time. So, dude,
it's so funny you say that, because sometimes I'll see someone, like I'm 26. I'll see people who are maybe 35, 36, 40 years old, and they're crushing it. And it's like, I have to think, like, when they were my age, what were they doing? Am I on that trajectory? And it's amazing what you can do in a relative short period of time, 5-10 years. If you do the work every day, you can do some incredible things. So it's a pretty interesting journey you got there, man. So let's get into, like, you got the podcast now, you got a lot of things going on. I know, being a listener of your podcast, I know that you got the business to a point where I think before you started some of these other businesses, I think you were like a big lifestyle guy. I think you were playing a lot of golf. You were kind of doing the 4-hour work week thing. So how did you kind of transition from going from having a regular job to you flipping a lot of houses, making a lot of money? And then how did you end up like automating that to where you really had that lifestyle thing going for a while? And now obviously you have some more ventures you're kind of getting into, because a lot of people want to do that, but they just have no idea how to like delegate and automate and, have their business kind of work without them.
Yeah. So the nice thing was, we were running this business doing one deal a month while I was working 70 hours a week. So we had to automate. So my wife, luckily, she kind of quit her job and went and built the systems and had the marketing. I just answered the phones and I did the sales stuff, but we built it working 10 to 15 hours a week. That's really how it was built. And so after we did that $100K month, my wife and I, we hadn't learned how to be married. And so we had some issues. And so we ended up moving back from Vancouver back to Tri-Cities. She ended up moving first, and then I followed her later. And so we kind of needed to focus on our marriage at that point in time. And so I kind of got a partner, a different guy in Vancouver, where we kind of worked out a deal where I would find the deals, and he would buy most of them, but I would put money in if I had it. That was the deal. If I had made money in Vancouver, it stayed in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. And then I would find them, he would fund them, he would flip them, and we'd split it 50-50. We covered all the marketing costs. He covered all the rehab. Nobody had charged anything back. And so that was our deal. We just found deals, and he would put them back together. So we literally found, we were carrying at any given time, like 10 to 15 flips at a time. And we didn't have to do most of the work. We do a couple in Tri-Cities. But I was burned out from working so much for 6.5 years at Franz, that I just needed a break, and I needed to learn how to be married. I needed to learn how to be an adult. I needed to learn how to be more mature. So Christy and I started traveling. I had a big passion for golf. I had screwed it up a lot in my high school and college. I went and played college for 6 months. I tested into all high school classes. So I wasn't even taking college classes at the time, but I basically flunked out of that and didn't play good golf because I was doing too many drugs. And so I'm like, I want to go play golf. And so I started playing pro-ams. I started playing state tournaments. I started playing all the time, 150 rounds a year, and just started playing. And I just said, we were making 250 to 300,000. We bought a rental here and there along the way, but it was enough. And my wife and I, we went to Southeast Asia for a month. We went to Europe. We traveled. We did a bunch of fun stuff, met a bunch of people, helped put our marriage back together in a lot of sense. So we could, actually figure out how to do that part of it. And we just basically said it was enough. We had other passions and other things we wanted to do that were more important at the time. And that's kind of how we did it. My wife built really good systems. So like I had a VA that listens to all my phone calls when they come in. They make notes in my CRM for me, tell me when to follow up with people. All I did was the phones and the appointments, and my partner would do the appointments in Vancouver if I couldn't make it. And I would lock them up over the phone. Once we lock them up, my wife would handle most of the rehab, like most of the design. She has a design packet she built. Everything's always the same. So she just go through, walk with the contractor. We need 2 of these, 7 of these, 5 of these, whatever. Here it is. Go to Lowe's. They deliver it. Contractors put it back together. Pretty easy deal. And so it just didn't take that much time. And so we just kind of didn't stay out of our lane or get out of our lane very much. And then 2019, I won my club championship. It was the first time I got it right there. First time I ever won any tournament. And I won by 9 and shot 11 under over 2 days. And all of a sudden my just passion to play golf and compete just fizzled away. Yeah. And we had a boy at the time. I had a 9-month-old. So, I kind of fizzled away, and then I got really depressed, and then COVID hit.
Yeah. Right. And then then the world changed.
Yeah.
It's interesting you said golf, because I was like in that mode of like work. I still work a lot, but like I started playing golf recently, like starting in like May. I used to work at a golf course when I was like 19 years old, but I started playing a lot now, like, a couple times a week here and there, playing tomorrow. And it's just allowed me to like unplug, from the business. And actually when I go and I get back from playing golf or whatever, I work a lot better because I was able to really take that time off when I'm playing golf. I call it like the 4-hour vacation if I'm playing 18 holes. Yeah. And it allows me to just kind of like decompress. It's like my version of relaxing, because I'm still, networking with people. I go golfing with a lot of investors. So we have conversations, and I found that to be a really powerful tool. A lot of my real estate friends, we all kind of take that time to play golf to like unplug. So it's cool that you're able to do that competitively. Next time, if we ever meet in person, I'd love to take you golfing, man. It's always fun to go with others and, be able to spend a lot of time not in the office, like where you're spending 4 hours with someone, playing golf. Yeah. You can have a lot of good conversations. You never know what's going to come from that. So yeah, it's a real cool way to unplug. So obviously COVID hit, you started some other businesses. So let's just kind of get into what you have going on today as of, August of 2021 right now. Time just kind of flies by now. So I know you have tweaked some things, and, you're working a lot more now, by choice, which is awesome. By choice. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So what do you got going on now? Cause you got a lot of good stuff going.
Yeah. So COVID hit, I got really depressed because we stopped doing marketing because people were just like, everybody's panicked, didn't know what was going on. People were really angry, got depressed. I actually relapsed after almost 9.5 years sober. And so, which was, in hindsight, I was actually happy it happened because it kind of kicked me in the ass a little bit. Yeah. And I had hired a life coach in December of 2019 to help me kind of get unstuck and figure out what I wanted to do. It's actually Jason Drees, Brandon Turner's coach. Yeah, perfect. And so we're trying to figure it out because I wasn't happy. And then at some point I had met Cole Rue Johnson. He was he's a 20 at the time. He was 21, 22. And he was just crushing it in a lot of different aspects. At one point at 19, he was in like 12 different markets across the country. Pared that back because he just wasn't making that as much money as he could in Seattle. He had built a call center though, that he was just selling to some of his friends to help cover some of his costs, because he had like 10 to 20 callers calling for him at any given time up in Seattle. And so I'm like, hey, let me see if I want to use it for my business to see if we can generate some leads. And I started using it, and I'm like, hey, I think I can help you with some of the scripts and help with the team in the call center. I'm really good at cold calling. I'm really good at that side of the business. And he's like, cool, why don't you just help me sell it and we'll turn this into a business? And I'm like, okay. So he got to keep all his previous clients. And then we came on and I brought one of my at the time, my operations guy on to help us. And then he was helping. We were trying to figure it out a little bit. I'd sold it, got people really excited. But then my operations manager ended up quitting my business, and it was like good thing for both of us. And so I took his equity back because he wasn't helping do anything. And he wasn't going to quit my business and then stay in the call center.
Yeah. Right.
And so, because it was an opportunity I was giving him at the time to increase his income. So we brought on Tucker Merrihew, the host, who was the old host of the show, to he liked the idea. We had called for him, and he wanted, as soon as I told him my kid quit, he's like, hey, there's equity. I want to come in and help you guys. So we brought him in about 2 weeks. We realized that he's a better CEO. And so we made him the CEO, and then we started going after that. And at the same time, we had some buddies that had tied up a 24 unit in our hometown, and we had bought more rentals. Since then, we had like 10 doors, like 2 duplexes and 6 single families total. And so they call us like, hey, we got this 24 unit tied up in Kennewick. Do you guys want to go check it out for us to see if it looks good? And we're like, yeah. And I'm like, hey, why don't you let us come in? So we came in as a quarter on that. And so we bought that in June, and then Chrissy was going to kind of manage that. And at that time, I had kind of gotten in the middle of like her managing it when we were doing like our group calls, like with all the partners. And she finally, after the first call, she's like, this is going to be my cross, my flag. I'm going to plant it here, stay the F away. And I said, okay. So at the time she's like, so I'm like, okay, I'm done with rentals. I'm not touching rentals. You can handle all the property management, like go build your own, own grave. But hindsight, she's way better at it than I am. Yeah. And so that freed me up a bunch to do the call center. And so then we started doing that. Then I bought an 8 unit with a couple of guys that we put together. And in 11 months, the call center did over $1 million in revenue in the first 11 months. We're on a run rate to do like $1.5 million this year, probably maybe $1.8 million. And so that's crushing it. And then we bought another 25 unit in May that we closed on. And I just on Monday got under contract on a 32 unit and a mile away from that 25 unit. So,
and these are all up in that Tri-City area in Washington?
All of them except for the 8 unit. I have an 8 unit in Vancouver, a duplex, and a single family still in Vancouver. And then Christy and I have it. And then, so the 24 unit, we own a quarter of. The 8 unit, we own a third of, but we got in with less equity, with less money. And then the 25 unit, we own 50-50 of that. And then we might raise for this 32 unit. But then also in the pipeline, we started partnering with a developer. I partnered with a developer. So we have a 60 lot subdivision on the books that we're working on. We own the dirt for a 13 unit we're building, and we own the dirt, just closed last week, to build an 18 unit in Tri-Cities as well.
Dude, that's awesome, man. Holy cow. Now these small apartments are where you can, I don't have any. I have a small like commercial mixed use building, which is in a thorn in my side, but it's cool to see you're kind of jumping into these larger deals, kind of progressing from are you still doing any flips or wholesales, or you kind of transition more into just the smaller apartments?
No, I got 3 wholesales on the books right now. We still own 4 flips, not as many. I really don't want to do flips, but it's kind of a set it and forget it machine for the most part. But I've kind of done it different than a lot of people have. So I have I have my business partner in Vancouver, and he is just paying us on most of them. I don't want to get in most of those deals, so I'm putting most of my money in my multifamily stuff and some commercial stuff. And so, as I talked about earlier, the deal always was, if I made the money in Vancouver and I want to get 50-50 on the flips, it had to stay there. And so the partner I had in Vancouver, he had 2 boys. One was a little bit older and one was a little bit younger than me. And so he really took me in like a son. But to be fair, it's not a fair deal for me to get him pay for everything, and I just bring the deal and I get half of it. If I have money that that I've made in Vancouver, it wasn't fair. So that was always the deal. So he's paying me wholesale fees out on some of those. And then I have 2 guys in Tri-Cities that I trust that are really big flippers. They've been doing this for quite a while, that are actually in my CRM. And perfect example, last week I was traveling. We had an appointment come through. I wasn't going to be able to make the appointment. So I sent one of my buddies here, Todd, and he went on the appointment. He ended up tying it up yesterday. And he's like, there's probably like 60 grand when he thought he was going to get it for 319. And he's like, there's probably 60 grand in there. So he's going to pay me 15 grand just for setting the appointment. And he went and tied it all up. Well, he ended up having to pay 325. And I'm like, hey, why don't we just split it, out of my whole, whatever you're going to pay me. So he's going to pay me 12 grand. And my sales manager just teed up the appointment. I never went to the house. I never did anything with it. So, and we're just easy to work with. We've always had that mentality of like, I can go way farther with just a few really key people instead of having like a huge buyers list. Cause you can never do that. Like send it to your buyers list to be like, hey guys, can you go on this appointment and tie it up and then pay me money?
Yeah. In New York, they'd cut your head off. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really good feeling. But we also, we always, the other flip side is I took the other guy in Tri-Cities to a deal that I thought he might want to buy. And that's what I've been doing. If I know I don't want to buy, I'm just taking the guys that I think want to buy it. And we ended up going and walking it. And we ended up we were planning on buying it and relisting it because neither one of us wanted to flip it. But I ended up wholesaling it. And technically he didn't bring the lead in. He didn't negotiate it. He didn't do anything, but I'm still paying him money off that deal because it's the right thing to do. Right. Because he had the intention to buy it with me and do it. And we were going to do, he's like, I'll buy it. We can just clean it up and relist it. And we'll go 50-50. I'm like, okay, well, then we ended up assigning it for 20 grand. And so I'm going to pay him like basically an agent fee. So he's going to get like 5,500 on that deal.
Dude, that's the way to go. And that's such a good takeaway for the listeners. It's playing the long game with people who you can know, like, and trust. I see like a lot of people, they try to like hoard it all themselves, and they're just like, they're so transactional based. Like they're like, oh, well, I need to make all this money on this deal because I need the money today. But they forget to think about the future. Like I'll give you an example. So I started in New York and then I'm 26 now. So I was like 21, 22 and I was struggling. And I found a guy down in Dallas who I met at a mastermind called Investor Fuel. I called him up. I said, hey, I have this deal here in the Dallas area. Would you be able to go lock it up for me and we can split it? So we ended up making like 15 grand on that deal or 20 grand, split it. And the next week I called him up, we made 30 grand on a deal. And then we did like 45 deals after that in Dallas. Virtually, I never saw these houses if I didn't want to. And I was telling someone about this and they were like, man, you're leaving all this money on the table. I'm like, A, I don't live in Texas, and B, I don't really do anything. I get the deal sometimes on the phone or I'll send him out there. I'm splitting the profits. He's excited for my phone call because he knows there's about to be money to be made. And I'd rather do that and work with others versus trying to keep all the money myself and set this whole team up down there. So, I mean, we made a fortune. We made hundreds of thousands of dollars together.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was able to align myself with someone and split the profits versus, just trying to keep it all myself and do it all,
Yeah. So funny story about that. So when we first got started, I had worked with that one guy that I talked about for that first $5,000.
Yeah.
The second guy I wholesaled a deal to ended up being the biggest buyer in Vancouver. And so I was just assigning deals to him every time. I just sent them straight to him because it was easier at the end of the day. Like I was working 70 hours a week and he always paid a fair price. And basically what he would do is I would just send him the deal before I had it tied up and I'd be like, what would you pay for this? And he's like, I'd pay, 125 and I try to get it for less. Well, as I started learning more and more, he started trying to take advantage of me, like saying, oh, I can't finish this basement, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden he's finishing the basement. Yeah. And all these things are like, I'll cut you in on the back end because you're, whatever. And then he paid me really good on one. And then we ended up, so I'm like, okay, then we bought one together and he just hosed me. And so he was part of a group that buys down at the auctions. And so my now partner was one of the partners in the auction. They all buy stuff together. And so this guy was always inflating rehab costs. He kind of built a house of cards. And so I was kind of started, once that guy offered me the $300,000, I was able to say, hey, seller or buyer, I'll sell you this deal for X. If you don't want it, then you don't, whatever, because I can buy it myself. Now I had some leverage. And so he started getting mad. He tried to put me in my place. He backed out of a contract 2 days before closing one time. And so I ended up calling this other guy and he helped me, didn't charge me anything. We got it sold. I actually lost money on that deal because the other guy said he was going to pay something and we probably tied it up for too much, but we got the deal taken care of, took care of the seller. And so I ended up partnering with this other guy. But it's like I have done with my now partner over the last 4 years, probably over 100 deals. Like our very first deal, we made $121,000 on our very first flip. And it's like this so short-sighted of the first guy because he lost out on 100 deals.
I know. It's crazy.
And they were good deals, way better than they were buying in an auction. And so, we've ran a lot across a lot of people, but And my mentality is I love relationships and love people. And it's just more enjoyable. Even if I'm making a little bit less money, it's more enjoyable. And then, you know, another example on this 13 unit we're building, my buddy that I owned a commercial building tied it up and he asked me who could build this or develop it or whatever. And I was like, oh, this guy. And so they were going to cut me in 20% of the deal just for bringing the financing for the deal, the dirt, and connecting the two.
Yeah.
But the guy that brought the deal to me, him and I owned a commercial building together, and he wanted to swap equity. So he had 40% in the 13 unit, and we were a third in the commercial deal. And I'm like, fine. We had put up the money to buy the commercial deal. I'm like, so give me my money back, and we'll just swap equity. No big deal. I actually wanted to get out of the commercial building anyway. Yeah. And so we did. So then all of a sudden I have 40% of this equity of the 13 unit or 60%. And the builder developer had 40%. And I said, hey, I got 60%. I'm giving you 10. We're 50-50 now. Just out of the blue, just because I want our relationship to be aligned. And now he brought me in a 60 lot subdivision that I have done nothing for.
Yeah.
Right. Like I have done
did the right thing
for it. Because he's like, now he's aligned because we are both aligned. Now I've helped him and I'll help finance it and bring financing and things like that. But I don't deserve 50%, but he didn't deserve the 10%, right? Yep. Or he didn't deserve the other stuff. And it's just like, what goes around comes around. I always talk about it's the law of reciprocity. If people feel like they owe you something, it just creates good harmony, right? Because nobody wants to be like indebted to somebody else. So if you give, you will receive.
Dude, that's so freaking true, man. I remember listening to one of you and does Cole still do the podcast? I was listening to an episode with both you guys on there.
No.
So
back he was too busy being a 23-year-old making hundreds and almost maybe $1 million and dating girls. Now he's engaged and living in San Diego, Seattle. Yeah.
I think he lives down here, right? In San Diego.
He does, well, half year.
Okay. He's a snowbird or whatever. It's like the Florida
for tax purposes. He only lives there half time.
I don't blame him. So you guys were talking about a deal. You had this guy, James Daynard on the show.
Yeah.
So this dude is obviously a big investor up in Seattle. And I think Cole made $200,000 on this house. You guys were talking about it on the podcast. I remember listening to this podcast. And I believe it was like Cole brought him to the house and he's like, hey, would you pay whatever for it? And they walked it and he ended up making $200,000. And like, the buyer, James, was happy as a clam because like the numbers still work for him.
Yeah.
So it just shows like at the end of the day.
They walked the deal before they had tied up. And so they knew that they were going to be in it like 450 or whatever. And Jimmy going into it said like, I'll pay 575. Well, he walked the house and it needed less work than he thought. So he's like, I'll pay 600.
Yeah.
Okay. So Mike, Cole's partner, goes back in there, locks it up for 425. So they made 175. So they come back out, they're in the car riding back and Jimmy's like, what'd you tie it up for? And Mike's like, 425. He's like, fuck yeah. Excuse me. Hopefully we discuss on here, but he's like, nice job. It's close to the next week. Never said a word. So who do you think they call whenever they have a deal?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And who do you think when Jimmy says, I can only give you guys like 5 or 10 for this one, who do you think they're going to trust?
Exactly,
right?
Man.
Or like my business partner, we had a deal that, back in April that my guy tied up and did a really good job tying it up. And Corey's like, what do you want out of this, Elliot? I'm like, I don't know. What do you think you're going to make on it? He's like, I have no idea. Because it was a higher price point house and the market was going crazy. And I'm like, well, just pay my sales guy $3,500 because you were a pain in the ass and made him renegotiate it 3 times. And then just take care of me on the back end. And I trust him, at the end of the day, I trust his opinion. And like just last week, we had owned a property that we were going to flip and he ended up turning it into a rental for one of his construction guys about 3 years ago. I didn't have any money into it. He did all the rehab but it was like, we owned it together basically, but I didn't see any money from it. I was like, hey, I have some better deals that I want to put that money in. Can you buy me out of this deal now? So we didn't go back and go through all the books and see exactly how much money he had put into it versus, and how much rent he has made and exactly amount. We're like, hey, what do you think? He's like, I'm like, I think you put about this. He's like, you probably put about this much into it. And I'm like, okay, it's probably worth this minus selling costs. And he's like, okay, how about 35 grand? And I'm like, yeah, I was hoping for 40, but I'll take 35. I trust you. But now all of a sudden I gave in on that a little bit. And the next one, but see, then it just always works. Yeah, really, really, really well. Like 5 grand means nothing in the grand scheme of this deal.
Dude, it's so freaking true, man. And it's like, it takes years to build a reputation and a minute to lose it, right? If you do the one stupid thing, like if a buyer goes and screws you at the end, it's like, a lot of people don't see the long picture. They don't see the long game. So it's really cool to see how you've like formed these relationships with, people in your markets, and the right thing will always, be the right thing. So a couple more questions before we, kind of wrap the show up here. I want to respect your time with these apartments that you're buying.
I got you down for an hour and a half, and I'm a talker.
Oh, look at that, man.
So,
I've got tons of time. What are you doing? Are these apartments you're buying? Are you buying these things on a value add basis? Are you buying them cash flowing from day one? Kind of walk me through like your strategy with some of these smaller, large apartments.
Yeah, so we'll do the first 24 unit we bought, it was way under market rent. We actually only had 2 weeks to close on it. I had to come up with cash. And then we ended up financing out. We only had to put like 125. The partners came up with like 800,000. And then we got a private loan for 800,000, refied it out in 45 days. And so, but that one was true, like value add in the sense of like, it was well below market rents. It was in a lower income area. So we did have to turn over some of the units. We actually had never been inside of it when we bought it. We just knew that it was an decent deal, that we knew it would cash flow really well. And so my wife's been working on that. So she's gotten, really focusing on getting the NOI up, which is net operating income. So buildings are anything over 5 units, anything in the commercial world is based on a cap rate. Usually is like, and that's like, if you were to buy this deal all cash, like what rate is the market trading for? So in our market, that's trading for about a 6 cap usually. And so, so my wife's just really been focused on getting the net operating income up. So that increases the value of the building there. And so she's got like 14 units turned over in the first year, even with COVID. Net operating income's up like $3,500 a month. I don't even know. I don't pay attention to the rentals, but so that she's done a really good job on that one. Then the 8 unit that we bought was more of a just buy and hold. Like it was kind of, they already did most of the rehabs. Like we thought there's an opportunity to raise the rents a little bit and maybe just be a little bit more efficient in the management. But it was right by in an area of Vancouver that I thought was gentrifying, because they just put a Starbucks like a quarter mile away. This area was the only place that the path of progress could really push from downtown. And I just wanted to own that. My wife fought me on it. Now she's glad we bought it. And so then the 25 unit was just, we could manage it better. That was really the whole idea, was how do we manage this better? And so we bought it, for 2.1. Rents were a little low, but we bought it at like a 7-8 cap, and it would have traded as a 6 cap all day long. So we probably bought it with like $700,000 of equity. So it was just a good deal. Awesome. So like, we're just kind of, when we find opportunity, like we're just trying to pounce on it. And we're just trying to own assets because we feel like inflation is a real thing. Last year when COVID hit, the one thing that I just smartly did was said, Christy, inflation is going to hit. We need to own and buy as many assets as possible, which we did. And we're smelling like a freaking rose right now. And then I have a buddy that I partner with on the 25 unit that we are going to buy 500 in the next 18 months. So that's kind of our goal, just to get as many assets under management as possible.
That's awesome, man. That's the way to go, especially transitioning from, the fix and flip business. And that's the thing a lot of people get confused on. Like when I got started, it was like, I needed to make money today by flipping and wholesaling. And then I realized after making, over $1 million doing that, like I'm making a lot of money, but it is such a transactional based business. You have to take it for what it is, not what you want it to be. And you can automate it and systematize it. But at the end of the day, like the real guys who are building the wealth, like Brandon Turner, like he started doing these larger commercial properties, he's building himself generational wealth, and he's got the reoccurring, revenue coming in from the apartments versus, making $100,000 a month in flips is great. But like at the end of the day, like, we'll have months we'll do well. And I'm like, shit, we got to start all over again. We got to pound the marketing again and get the leads coming in. And
my partner always used to, we would get loaded and he stop buying, turn it off. And then all of a sudden we start selling them and he's like, go buy them. And for the first couple of weeks, I'd be like, I suck at this. I'm never going to buy another house again. And then all of a sudden I have like 6.
Yep. And you got like, oh my gosh, then you got all these transaction coordinations and buyers and running around. And it's funny. I just started buying rentals last year, and the first 2 I bought were total dogs. I bought this fucking property. This is a crazy like sales marketing. Like, a lot of people, they look for laydowns and they don't realize that some of the best deals are not laydowns. This lady, this is so weird how it happened. This lady sent my some return mail to my parents' house. I wasn't even living there. And I was back there for like a week, and I'm going through the mail and I'm just like, what the fuck is this? It was like a hand addressed letter to me. I'm like, I'm gonna check this out. Check this thing out. She sends me a letter and she says, hey, I have this property. I actually wholesale the house down the street, so I knew the area like the back of my hand. She's like, if you're interested in buying this, email me at this email address. And I'm thinking like, whatever, let me just do this. So I email her. We're doing this whole thing through email. She ends up selling me this rental property for like 40 cents on the dollar with a tenant who's paying $950 a month rent. They've been living there for 20 years. Market rent is like $2,000.
Oh, geez.
So, I bought it. I had to close on it sight unseen. I couldn't even walk it. So like my first couple rentals, I've just been getting fucked, with bad tenants. And I think I'm like seeing that side of the business now. So like anything else now is like
pay them to go away. Who cares if
you
pay
I tried that. We're evicting them now, but it's a mess. But it's just
how much did you offer them?
So in New York, it's hard to evict people. So I offered them $5,000. They told me to shit in a hat. And I was like, all right, well, I'll offer you $5,000 and I'll pay for all your moving shit. And I'll put a deposit down on your new apartment. And they were like, okay, we'll do that. And then they never ended up doing it. And the COVID moratorium has been going on. So I contacted an attorney and he's like, listen, even though you are paying me, so like it is in my best interest for you to work with me, you're going to have to evict them either way. Like they're not going to go unless you give them a crazy number. So like just evict them and like stop the bleeding now versus like trying to let them kind of putz by. So we're evicting them now. It's been interesting, but it's part of the business. And like, I think I would let that deal kind of eat me alive a little bit. I think all pissed off and frustrated. I already refinanced and got like 40 grand out of it. So it's all house money now. But I'm like, if I look at this property in like a 5 to 10 year horizon, like I put 15-year fixed debt, 2.9% interest rate, like this thing will be paid off in 15 years. It'll cash flow once these tenants are out, $600 a month. I need to have a longer horizon for these rentals versus,
that's the hard part. Slow money versus fast money.
Yeah, dude.
And like, I'm an addict, so I like fast money. So it's like this development stuff just drives me nuts.
Takes forever, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, it drives me nuts. But I know you got to do it. Same with apartments. It drives me nuts. That's why I don't deal with it. I don't know where we're at. So like when we closed on the day we closed on the 25 unit, I called my buddy Greg and I said, you know why this is a great day is like, cause we just closed on this. I said, no, because I'm done. I don't have to do anything ever.
Yeah, right.
This apartment. My wife runs all over. So, and then if we get this 32 unit, which we think there's 2 extra units in there. If we 32 will get us at 98 doors under management. And then 2 will get us, if we can get 2, we can get over 100. So
that's amazing, man. And that adds up to after, you have those things start paying down. I mean, then you don't need to work anymore if you don't want to, which is the nice thing.
Yeah. So we're there now, but like for a middle-class life, but like I'm having fun. Like it's fun at the end of the day. But problem is I need the flips or development or something to sell something so I can go buy more apartments. Cause I don't want to like syndicate these at like 70-30. And then I only own like 10% or 5% of the GP fund. Like I want to own it like a minimum of a quarter of these deals. And that's really the thought process, I guess I have. It's for the mid-level ones. I think that's kind of the idea. For the bigger, like say you got 100 unit and up, like, yeah, we could syndicate those and own a little bit less, but I don't know. I'd rather say I have 500 units and I own like 50% of the portfolio versus I own 5,000 units and I own 3% of the portfolio.
Yeah. I noticed that I went to an apartment conference. This was a while ago. And like they were talking, I didn't really know what like syndication was. So I'm like, I'm gonna go to this conference and they were running the numbers. And I was like, wait, a lot of these guys own, thousands of units, but they own like a small fraction of it. And in my head, I'm like, I'd rather have less units and actually like own that equity. So like I'm making real money from it. And then there's all that responsibility. You have, hundreds of investors. It's like,
unless you're Brandon Turner. So we did a show. I did a deal with Brandon. I didn't put it on the podcast, which I probably should have last week because I didn't drop a show, but sorry, squirrel. I put it on YouTube and Brandon. So Brandon's a buddy of mine. We were hanging out all last week in Steamboat. We were in part of GoBundance together, which you should look at joining, by the way. You might really enjoy that.
I've heard good things about that group. Yeah, it's like awesome. The millionaires only one. You have to have like $1 million net worth. And
I think they're actually going to raise it to like 2.2 next year is what I heard.
That's awesome.
So yeah, get in now, and then use me as a reference because I get money for it.
Okay.
Anyway, so we did a show a couple of weeks ago about him raising capital. And so he's actually had operators that they're going to, and saying, hey, like, how big of a deal can you do? And they're like, by yourself. And they're like 20 to 25 million. He's like, what if you doubled that? And I went and raised half the money for you. Would you give us half the GP fund? And they're like, absolutely. And so he raised, for one deal, they bought a 535 unit in Houston, Texas. He was only supposed to raise $13 million, and he was going to get half of the GP fund, which is unbelievable. All they're doing is raising money and betting operators. They're not running anything. And so he ended up raising $26 million. He raised the whole thing. It's like, here you go. But they still got 50% of the GP fund. So now I think there is something to be said for, and that's his company got that much, but there's something to be said for, if I am not operating these deals and I'm only helping facilitate the buying of them, then I would take a smaller position in these deals, right? That's still really good. So if I can do that, that's fantastic. So my whole thing right now is, because I have so much going on, you know, I have the podcast, I have a commercial deal that we're buying for $1.8 million. We have the apartments, I don't know how to put streets in. I don't know how to build. I don't know how to do all this stuff. So like I'm trying to be like a surgeon. So if anybody thinks of a surgeon, like when they go in there, they talk to the people before, like, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we need to do for the surgery. He does zero prep for this deal. Like literally the patient's in there, passed out on the table, probably maybe cut open a little bit. He goes in there, somebody washes his hands for him. They put gloves on his hands for him. He goes in there, makes 3 little cuts or whatever. Some surgeons are way longer, right? But they go only do what they're really good at, right? And then when they're done, they say, all right, you close them up. I'm done. My highest and best use is over, right?
Yep.
And so my highest and best use is connecting people, finding deals, whether it's through our marketing efforts or putting deals together through relationships or anything like that, and finding money and finding the operators to do it. So that is my only 3 things I'm working at, is deals, operators, and money. And so everything else, like, I just don't do.
That's awesome. Dude, there's a book you got to check out, man. Oh man, he talked about something. So it's called The Entrepreneur Roller Coaster by
Darren Hardy. I love it.
Yeah.
That was one of the first books I listened to. Like, and I remember him talking on there, like when he was doing the real estate agent stuff, and he's like, I have to do all this. I'm working 12, 15 hours a day. He's like, you know what? I'm going to put a stopwatch, and I'm going to time myself at the end of the day. And I'm only going to start the stopwatch when I'm doing things that I can do, which was sitting in front of sellers or something like that. Right. And so literally at the end of the day, he worked like 12 or 14 hours, and he's like 28 minutes.
Yeah. On a whole work day.
Yeah, and I worked 12 hours. I worked 12 hours, but the hard part with that is, one, finding competent people, because most people that are entrepreneurs are control freaks. Finding competent people, which I'm very fortunate to have my wife, who's very competent and can run operations. She's more of the COO. I'm more of the visionary. So she's the integrator in this deal, but finding competent sales guys. Like, I still have a hard time letting go a lot of the sales side of it. I have a sales manager that kind of tees me up, and he'll close some deals. But like ones that I really want, I'll close them.
Yeah.
But then, you know, I have to let go that maybe the marketing's not getting out on time, or, you know, like we're putting a big multifamily marketing campaign together. There was certain things in there that I had to do. Like, we had our VA scrub it. And then me and my partner, Greg, he went through Snohomish County. I went through Clark and Tri-Cities, and I went line by line, all these properties, and rated them 1 to 5, because that's a gut feeling deal, because I know what I want to buy. And so we targeted our list, very targeted, but then I hand it out. I build the marketing plan. So on day 1, we start with texting. Day 14 or day 7, anybody who hasn't texted back gets ordered marketing, handwritten mailer. Day 14, it's delivered. Day 17, we have a voicemail drop, all the way to day like 127. We have build this whole marketing plan, but I'm not doing any of it. You know, my team's doing it.
You know what you're good at, you know?
Yeah.
You know
just answer the phone. If I just talk on the sellers, like, that's my deal. I'm good with sellers. Same with the 32 unit that we just tied up. I'm dealing with the sellers. That's my skill set. And
that's where you bring the value, you know, it's good that you know that, because a lot of people, they just try to do it all. They're like, no one can do the accounting like me. It's like, dude, really? You want to sit there and do QuickBooks all day? Like, really? You think that's gonna, yeah.
Perfect
you know
example.
What I mean? Like shit like that.
Perfect example of why I shouldn't be in charge of anything.
Yeah.
So
you do what you're good at.
Last week, I went to GoBundance. I had 5 flights that I had to take, and I booked this trip myself because my wife wasn't going. I had 5 flights, and I was waiting for some of the flights. Well, one, I waited till the last minute, my first flights, and I ended up paying more, but I didn't know when people were leaving. And so I want to be flexible. So I make it to Steamboat, fine. And that was 2 flights to get there. And then everybody was leaving on the 7 a.m. flight, basically to go back to Denver. My flight was at 1, booked that flight to leave from Denver to Seattle because I was speaking at a conference. And so I show up to the airport. I'm like, this is weird. At like 5:30, I'm like, this is weird. I didn't get a confirmation on my, that I had a ticket or like a check-in. Usually they send you a check-in, whatever. Go to the counter. I'm like, here's my ID. And she's like, oh, you're not on this flight. What do you mean I'm not on a flight? She's like, no, you didn't book. I'm like, shoot, I must not have booked it. So she's like, hurry up. There's 1 seat left. So I got the last seat. Luckily, they didn't charge me an arm and a leg for it. So, okay, crisis averted. Then I'm hanging out with Greg the next day, and he's like, we're trying to figure out what days work for him to come up to walk this property we're going to tie up. And I'm like, Thursday this week was one of them. And I look and I'm like, oh, I have a flight. I booked it on the wrong week for the flight, which reminds me, I got to call and cancel it so I can get my money back. And so then I'm flying from Seattle to Portland to have my wife and my mom and my son pick me up so we can go to the beach to go to the kite festival for the weekend on Saturday. And we had to time it perfect. And so I wake up in the morning, I'm trying to check in on my Alaska app. I'm like, this is weird. I can't check into my flight. Didn't think anything of it. Even though the same thing happened 2 days before that. And then about noon, I'm looking, I'm like, oh shit, I booked it for the next Saturday.
Oh,
so
you're like, yeah.
So I had to catch a ride. So out of 5 flights, I booked 2 of them wrong. And it's like, I should not do anything that has anything to do with detail.
Yeah. Flight logistics is not for you.
Anything with detail. Since my wife and I got engaged, I have not managed our finances. She has put me on an allowance, not anymore really an allowance, but when we first got married, I had been on an allowance up until like a year and a half ago of what I got to spend. I don't touch the bills. I don't do anything because we would literally have a negative credit score.
Well, the thing is, you know what you're good at. And fortunately, the things that you're good at are money producing things like bringing in deals and bringing in money. So that's correct. That's really all that matters, you know? So you picked a good skill to master, man. I could talk to you all day. I definitely got a lot of value. I think the listeners got a lot of value from this show and learning about your journey and how you have your tentacles and all these different businesses and things like that. So if people wanted to check out your call center, you know, where should they go to find out more information?
So they could just go to callmagicleads.com and fill out a form to set up a call with us. Okay. I ended up popping on most of those calls. Still just while we're growing that. And then you could do that. You can follow me on Instagram at Elliot Smith REI. So it's just my name, Elliot Smith REI. And then, that's then the Real Dealz Podcast as well.
Sweet. So my assistant listening right now, she'll put the callmagicleads.com, Elliot Smith REI on Instagram, and then the podcast is the Real Dealz. I recommend all the listeners of my show, check out Elliot's show. It's freaking awesome. It's always in my top, shows up in the top. I listen to it on a weekly basis. You got great guests on there, man. That's another thing I like about your show is number one, you bring on good guests. And number two, you do a lot of good stuff before the guest comes on where you talk about what you have going on in your business, the good, the bad. You do a really good job communicating your message. And, as a guy who knows you a little bit better now than I did an hour ago, I really appreciate all you're doing out there for the community, man. I'm getting a lot of value and I'm sure thousands and thousands of others are as well.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. I like your show as well. I love doing it. And hit me up anytime. I'm always responding to people because I'm still kind of new in this influence world. So
yeah, right. It's funny. Yeah. People think it's funny. Before I end the record, this is a weird story. I was in Florida back in June. And do you know a guy named Ryan Dossie?
I do know Ryan Dossie.
Yeah. So a friend of mine, I was on his podcast or whatever, and I was at this bar and I was watching the Lightning game and some random dude was like, "Are you Greg?" And I'm like, yeah. He's like, "I saw you on a YouTube video with Ryan Dossie." And I'm like, what the so I got recognized in public and I'm like, dude, I'm some fucking peckerhead from New York. Like,
yeah, seriously.
So it's crazy the power of like social media. You never know who you're going to run into. I'm like, dude, what he was super cool. We had a great conversation, had a beer, but you never know who you run into, man. Maybe you'll get recognized at the airport.
I was with Brandon last week, like all week. And then dude, so many people come up to him. Well, most people can't join GoBundance because of him. But then we were in the airport and like literally people come up to him just all the time. Like, you changed my life or this or that.
Shit.
Oh, frick, dude. We're in the Amex lounge and literally we're there for like an hour and a half and like 4 people came up to him. Like just in that. And it's just like, yeah.
That's crazy, man. That's when you know you're doing something. He stands out with that big beard, It's not that hard to,
But he's just a good dude, honestly. Like who he is on the microphone is the same, if not a better person and just like human being. Like I text him, like, he did a talk in GoBundance about like all the businesses he has going on, his net worth and all that stuff. And I text him afterwards, even though we were rooming together, but like, I actually look up to him less for the businesses and more of who he is as a husband and a father and a friend, and just as an overall human being. You know, he had this really good quote. We could kind of end it with this, but it was like, is one of his like mentalities that he had for his life. He had, well, let me find it. I sent it to my wife. He said, earn big, live hard, and die broke. So his whole goal is to give everything away before he dies. And so, and he had another quote of like finding your why. It was what you're good at, what fires you up, and what breaks your heart. You know, and really trying to find like what your passion is in this world. So, just a good human being. So
love that, man. That's a great way to end the podcast, man. I really appreciate you coming on as a guest. We'll have all those links and Instagram follows in the show notes. Hope you have a great rest of your day, buddy.
You too.